Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 68, Epic Science Fiction. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the Foundation TV series, seasons 1 and 2. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing great too, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
New in my writing world. I think I mentioned this last time, I'm not sure. I finished the alpha edits for the second book in the Tales of Zara series. So alpha draft is done, and I've now handed that off to my critique partners to read and give me feedback. And I have begun editing toward the beta draft of my sci-fi thriller story called The Deep Dark. So it feels good to have something different to report than just, I'm still editing. I guess I am still editing, just now I'm on a different book.
And that's awesome. So remind me, is The Deep Dark available anyplace in its current format, or is that something that is a work in progress that you're still just working on?
Yeah, The Deep Dark is available on Kindle Vella. It's the alpha version. So basically the alpha version for me is what I call, it's like the rough draft that I clean up and make sure everything is consistent, but it hasn't undergone any structural editing or fleshing out. So it's more of the raw version of it. So if someone wants to see what a work in progress for me looks like, you can go onto Kindle Vella and read The Deep Dark. And The Deep Dark is a much more adult story than the Tales of Zara. Tales of Zara is like upper middle grade, lower young adult. And The Deep Dark is definitely an adult story. It's, I call it a mix between Die Hard and Aliens. So lots of violence and death, and there's swearing and things like that. So just be aware that that's, if you're going to read it, know what you're getting into.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And what's going on in your writing world?
Well, I am still working on Ecliptic, but I am very close. I have finished the climax, and now I'm just writing out the sort of the denouement wrap-up stuff, and I'm really enjoying it. It's going very well. I'm not pushing myself to produce a certain number of words. I'm just writing the scenes as they feel natural and good, and it's real close. And so I'm really excited about that, but I'm not putting myself under pressure to say, I must finish it today, or I must finish it this week, or anything, because when I do that, I lock up. So I'm just really enjoying the writing of it, and I'm really happy with the way it's going. I always think, people ask me what's my favorite book that I've written, and it's always the one I'm working on, because I can see the progress I've made in my craft with every book that I write. And so I'm excited especially when I get to the end of one like this, because it is the best book I've written so far. And I really enjoy
Excellent.
that. Yeah.
That's great. So I think we may have talked about this before, but I forget. How do you do your editing? Like what process? Like I go through, I have a rough draft, which becomes an alpha draft, which becomes a beta draft, which becomes a final draft. But I know a lot of other authors don't do that many, or some of them do a lot more than that. So like where do you fall in this editing
I don't
process?
do that many. Not purposefully anyway, because when I said, I was about to say, I don't do that many. But the truth is that I go through and review, I edit from a variety of different levels. So I'm reviewing for, how is the world building? Did I skip anything in the world building? How are my characters? Are they consistent with how I have crafted them? And are they identifiable to a reader? one of the things that I recognized very early on in my first series was that I had not yet mastered the fleshing out of the character to really kind of give them their own three-dimensionality. And that's something I want to do now. So I go through and I make sure I look at every single character and make sure that they're not just blending in with the other characters. So there's that layer, etc. I just sort of do all this reviewing, but I don't call it an alpha draft or a beta draft or anything like that. And of course, there's always, the grammar review, and I will also listen to the books. I find that listening to them, like using the text-to-speech on, say, Microsoft Word is incredibly helpful for catching. I usually look for, obviously grammatical problems, flow problems, word choice. If I find myself using the same word over and over again in one paragraph, I'll try to see if I can find a different word so that it has the variety that's interesting. So that's kind of mine. And then I don't really have good beta readers yet, and I need to work on that. So I'd love to have some beta readers who read for like plot holes and stuff like that. I've got a wonderful group of people who are happy to read for proofreading. Yeah. Which is great. I mean, that's a gift, and I love that. But the beta readers who are able to take a step back from the story and go, oh, this doesn't make sense, or, I got lost here, etc. Those folks are fewer and harder to find.
Yeah, I guess I go through a lot of the same steps, probably in my beta draft. My alpha draft, I don't do as much of that. It's more just making things consistent, removing temporary stuff. Like sometimes I'll put, insert character name here kind of things in my rough draft. So I go and fix that for my alpha draft so people can read it through. But then based on that feedback, my beta draft is the big one. That's where I do all the things you said, trying to flesh out the characters and the setting, description of the world, make sure everything makes sense. There's no big plot holes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, but I've used beta reader, like local beta readers from my writing group, and I've also paid a couple of beta readers through, I think, Fiverr, who were recommended by other people, which worked out pretty well. They gave me some good feedback, so I don't regret that. I've heard horror stories of people getting bad beta readers, so you definitely have to be careful. But I've been pretty lucky with that, I think.
Cool. And as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard, which is my space opera science fiction series, as it's being written on Patreon. The first book in the series, Apsis, is available right now. And Ecliptic is available in draft as far as I have written. So folks want to see how that progress is going and sort of follow along as it's being written, you are welcome to do so on Patreon. And you can get the first book in the Tales of Zara on Kindle Vella, which is an episodic format on Amazon, as well as Kindle ebooks. Are you in Kindle Unlimited?
Yes. Yeah, Zara is in Kindle Unlimited.
So if you are a member of the Kindle Unlimited program, you can read Zara for free there, or you can purchase the ebook on Amazon, and you can purchase the paperback on Amazon, as well as reading Mike's adult science fiction story, The Deep Dark, which is available in episodic format on Kindle Vella. And all those links will be in the show notes.
And I forgot, The Deep Dark is also available on my Patreon account or Ream account if you have either of those. So it's there as well. And we'll be there until I publish that book and it goes on Kindle Unlimited. Then I have to remove it from those places.
Right. And we'll put all those links in the show notes so folks can check those out. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books and movies and television?
Let's see. Reading-wise, I've just started reading the science fiction story, which we'll talk about in 3 weeks from now, I think. And then I haven't seen any movies recently, but I was watching a TV show called Outer Range, which I think is on Amazon. I might be wrong about that, but I think it's on Amazon. And it's a science fiction story with time travel elements. But it's more about like the drama between these families who live out on this range. I don't know where it is, Montana or something, maybe. I don't know what the setting actually is, but it's somewhere like that. And this guy discovers this hole on his property. It's like this void basically in the ground. And going through it takes you to another time period. So it's a weird mix of genres, but it's kind of cool. There's a couple seasons out, so I just finished watching the second season of that. It's pretty neat. You've been reading or watching?
So let's see. We have been watching Discovery. The last episode of season 5, which is the last episode for the entire series, airs today, I believe.
Oh, okay.
As we're recording this, yeah. And so I've been watching that and have been watching the Star Trek documentary, The Center Seat, a bit. And they just recently, the last episode we watched, or the last couple of episodes we watched, referenced Enterprise. So I started watching Enterprise again and started remembering what I didn't like about it. But that's okay.
That's funny.
I'm looking at it now more from the perspective of story, and that's kind of helpful. It's been educational, so I've been enjoying that part of it.
Cool.
Are you ready to talk about Foundation?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. Today we're talking about the story told in the Foundation TV series, seasons 1 and 2. And I am going to read what comes up on Google when you type in Foundation TV series. A complex saga of humans scattered on planets throughout the galaxy, all living under the rule of the Galactic Empire. Dr. Harry Seldon and his loyal followers attempt to preserve their culture as the galaxy collapses around them. Did you enjoy this series?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I had watched it before, and I don't know if I recommended it to you, but I know I've recommended it to a number of people. And I wanted to watch it again in preparation for this episode, thinking I would just skim through the episodes really fast to refresh myself of what was happening. But I ended up watching the whole series again because it really pulled me in. Yeah, I really like this series. It's definitely one of those things that you would describe as epic. It's epic not only in scale, but also in time and in space. There's so much here. And I think they do a good job of weaving character stories in with a larger science fiction concept that's going on, which is, as you described it as the description online said, where there's a fall of the Empire coming, and Harry Seldon and the Foundation are trying to limit the amount of time that humans spend in the Dark Ages, essentially, after that fall happens. It's according to the math and the predictions, it's inevitable that fall will happen. So they're just trying to limit the fallout from it, I guess. And yeah, I think they do a great job. I think even from the very beginning, I think it was smart to introduce us to the world through new eyes in the form of Gale. Yeah. So she's going into this universe, right? She's just on this literal backwater planet. And she knows really not a whole lot about the galaxy that's out there. So we get to see the introduction to Harry. We get to see the introduction to the Empire. We get to see the introduction to Trantor, the center of the Empire. All this through her unique eyes or her new eyes, and it introduces us. So they get to do a little bit of explaining as she herself is eased into that world, which doesn't take long. They get going pretty quick with the main plot of the story. And the plot is just wonderfully complex. A lot of threads are woven together, but it's also very easy to follow, as long as you're paying attention to what's going on. And there's a lot of nice twists throughout the series, like Harry getting stabbed. It's like, wasn't expecting that one. There's a lot of things like that where it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that to happen. So they do a good job of keeping your interest. I love the whole idea for the Empire that they set up. I don't think this is in the books at all, where Empire is, cloned versions of himself throughout time. I thought they played that really well, where they have the younger version, the middle version, and the older version. And they shift as the decades and centuries passed who's in that role, right? It's the same actor, but now he's playing, he was the younger guy before in the last 2 episodes, and now he's the middle-aged guy. So I thought that was very clever. I like the way they did that, and I like how each of them, though played by the same actor, still kind of has their own personality a little bit. They're clones, and they're meant to be like, this is the same actual entity moving through time, when obviously it's just a clone, right? It's just like, it's like a twin or a brother or something like that. It's not actually the same person, and they will have variations in their personalities. So we get to see that, and I thought they handled that really well. There's a lot of, I guess we'll hit this when we hit themes, but there's a lot of cool little themes and messages that they hit throughout. Like the Empire character reminds me of people who want and expect adoration from everyone, but they don't really deserve it, right? And that person will never know actual love because of who they are. And we see that played out and how that affects the people around them. And then ultimately how that culminates in rebellion by the end of the second season. Again, I think they did that so well. But there's just, I don't know, there's so many things, so many specific things. It's hard to encapsulate everything that happens. I remember I wanted to rewatch it because I remembered like some key things in my head, but a lot was lost. I tend to, eject stuff out of my mind once I've seen it. So that's why I wanted to go back and watch it again. And it's not that those elements weren't interesting or were boring. It's just that there was so much that happens in this series in just 2 seasons that I had forgotten about. It's like, wow, that's right. This happened, this happened, this happened. And they don't rush through it. The style of the show is actually very measured in terms of its pacing. But despite that, there's a lot that goes on. A lot that goes on in the plot and a lot that goes on with the characters. And I actually think I thought they improved in the second season. I was a little worried at the first season. I thought, the first season is really good. What are they going to do in the second season? And then I felt like it actually got better for me, which was a hard task. So I really like this show. I think it's very epic. And man, do I hope they continue to do seasons, or even if it's just one more season and they wrap it. I just hope it gets to be a complete show that they're able to finish. And kudos to all the people involved. I think everybody working on this show did a great job. Even congratulations to the people who greenlit this and put the amount of funding that was obviously put into these shows, because their production values are phenomenal. I think for me, I think it worked really well. I think this is one of the best science fiction shows that's been made. It really shows what can be done if you take, the content seriously. One quick note, obviously this foundation is based off of the books by Isaac Asimov, which were written many decades ago. They won like the best series of all time or something like that back in the day, even against Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Obviously, that's subjective and debatable depending on what kind of things you like. But the show more takes that original series as inspiration. It's kind of loosely based on the books, from what I remember. I haven't read the books in a long time, but I know there's some significant changes that happen from in this adaptation from the books to the show. But I think looking at this as its own, I think they did a phenomenal job. I really liked it, obviously. What did you think of it? What elements of the story did you like?
Well, first of all, you'll be happy to know that the third season has been greenlit. And I was actually looking at the Wikipedia page for it, and they've even gotten actors listed who are in season 3. So it's been greenlit, and they're working on it because they have released the names of people who are going to be participating. So that's like a very good sign. I agree. I think this is an excellent series. So enjoyable. It was one of these series that we really, and I've mentioned this before in previous podcast episodes. This is a very bingeable series that we forced ourselves to take one episode at a time because we wanted to really savor it because it's that good. I think you're exactly correct. when I was thinking about what did I really enjoy about this, the characters. You're talking about right at the very beginning when we meet Gail Dornick, this young woman who goes off to the big city essentially from her small town planet.
Yeah.
But we're introduced to her in such a way that she's immediately relatable. She is preparing to go on this journey and she's scared. And she's going to miss her home. And so you can always, anybody who's left home it can relate to that. Who's going to be like, oh yeah, that's kind of scary, etc. But then we start getting more layers. She has to leave or she's going to die. And there's just, what does that mean? Is that hyperbole or is she actually going to die? And we find out that eventually, yes, she's actually going to die. Her people are going to kill her for being into math, right? It's absolutely fascinating. And then, like you said, we get introduced to this whole big galaxy, and the world building that is here is so layered and so in depth that it feels positively real. I mean, this place exists. It feels like it actually exists. Every single moment exists, and it's brilliant. You had said that.
Yeah, could I interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely.
Only because I agree, and that was something I noted as I was watching it. A lot of times in sci-fi, you have places that feel kind of fake. Like this is just a set for this one little scene that they're doing, and the world doesn't feel fleshed out. I mean, you get that in a lot of sci-fi in particular. And I felt the same thing, and I thought this as I was watching through. I'm like, this just seems like a real place. It's populated. There's like a whole ecosystem here. Like everywhere they went. Yeah. Felt so real. Yeah, they did a great job. Okay, sorry.
I know. Enthusiasm is very much encouraged. And one of the things that you said about how there are so many elements, one of the things I appreciated is, and it goes to that world building, but it also goes to the layering of the story. Because yeah, there are a lot of elements in the story, but every single element is needed for the story. There is no fat here, which makes it such a rich experience. Every scene, every interaction is connected to something. And it may not be connected to the next scene. It may not even be connected to the next episode, but it's connected. And then you'll go back 3 episodes in to where you had that interesting but small layer of scene that's important. Everything is important. And not in a way because I think there are certain television shows, stories that have sort of little Easter eggs that help the consumer of the story, whether it's a reader or a watcher, sort of get excited and try to figure out the mystery. And it's not quite like that. It's just simply they lay a seed here that then blossoms there. And it's beautifully done. The complexity of the storytelling and the weaving of the story is stupendous and amazing. And it's still very tightly woven. There's just, like I said, there's no fat. There's nothing that I've seen that I felt like it was added to make the story longer, to make the story feel like it needed more. Nothing like that. I don't get a feeling like that at all with this. The characters are all well developed. Every single one of them has a well-defined need. You know what they want. You know who they are. You know where they're going and what their goals are. Even, as you pointed out, Empire, who is supposed to be the clone of the original emperor, who then is cloned as a young person, like a teenage, it starts as a child. I used to say the clones are born, and then they serve a function either as Dawn, and then Day, who's ostensibly in charge, and then Dusk, and then there's even one more. What was that called? The last one?
Yeah.
Darkness or
Night.
Yeah,
or
the one who's
like
about to die.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And we even got to see the depth of the culture of how they manage this transition when dusk is ready, becomes darkness, is ready to die, and they birth the new dawn as a baby. It's absolutely fascinating. And every single one of these characters, even this clone that is theoretically exactly the same, as you pointed out, every single generation is slightly different, with slightly different goals, with slightly different. Of course, that's going to be impacted by the environment and the time in which they come into being. But they do that. And these actors do it so beautifully. It was just astonishing to watch each actor as a different incarnation of that particular age, of that particular generation of the clone, be unique and standing apart from the previous ones. I thought the twists were brilliant. I love it. I'm sitting down and I'm watching an episode and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to happen. Here's a good example. This is a spoiler. So this is going to be a spoiler for probably 30 seconds. So if people want to just go put their fingers in their ears and go la, 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 la. There was the episode where Brother Don falls in love with the gardener, the young gardener woman.
Right.
I was sure she was going to die. Absolutely positive that she was going to be executed. And she wasn't. And that was absolutely glorious in how it completely subverted my expectations and did so in a way that was even more engaging and sort of like, holy cow.
That's pretty serious there.
So and that happens over and over again in both seasons. And I agree. I think season 2 was even better. I mean, even, I don't know, every single character is good. Even Demerzel, who is essentially a robot, is a character with depth and goals that are just now starting to become obvious.
Yeah, the second season really opened up a lot, didn't it?
And even her goals that are now becoming obvious in season 2 are sometimes in conflict or layered with the goals that were very clear in season 1. And I just love it. I think that's just so well done. I aspire to be this good a writer and have this good a story.
that's exactly what I was thinking of. I'm like, man, I got to step up my game.
So we've talked about what we love. Was there anything in the Foundation TV series that you weren't that crazy about, that you might have changed as a writer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was trying to think of this as we were going through, but I was so engaged with every episode, honestly. I was just kind of watching for enjoyment after a point. Maybe a couple things that I noticed, and I don't know how much changing this would affect things. Well, the first thing was the whole spacer thing. It's the people who were like bred to deal with, kind of reminded me of like a Dune.
Yeah,
They just took this from Dune. And I don't think that was in the original Foundation books. I might be wrong. Like I said, I read those so long ago. But it seems like they kind of mishmashed a few things together for the show. And that one just kind of struck out as being such an obvious ripoff. But maybe I'm not being fair to it. And sort of along the lines with that, it felt like for as good a science fiction show as it was, it felt like there were things that were just sort of magic. Like there's like almost fantasy, like the coin flipping thing. Like, oh, she sees the future, or is she controlling the coin? And then it's like, okay, I guess she sees the future because they're actually, they have this ability, and her mother has this ability to see the future. And with the spacers and the telekinesis, transfer of consciousness, there's a number of things like this that seemed like stretching the bounds of science fiction. But that said, some of that was in the books too. With the second Foundation and the mule, those are definitely in the books. So that was in the source material. And, who knows where things will be in tens of thousands of years from now, what kind of abilities would be possible. You never know. So those are just little things. Another thing that I might have changed just because of me as a writer, I would probably have just a little bit more humor in it. There are definitely moments where I laughed.
Yeah,
there are definitely moments where I laughed. I was like, that's just funny. And like, the way they set it up was really good. But I would put just a little bit more, not too much, because I think the tone is really good. Yeah, I mean, all these are really small things. I'm so impressed with this show. What about you? What would you improve?
There was only actually one thing that I didn't like, and it was a pattern of storytelling that I just didn't work for me. And that was the failure of relationships. It didn't seem to matter who the character was. If they were in a relationship, that relationship was going to end. And I didn't like that. I think, yes, relationships end. Yes, things happen in relationships, but relationships also continue. And I think there's so much other beautiful variety of characters and events that happen in this story. The pattern of Gale losing Raish, and then Salvor losing Hugo, and Harry losing, I forget the name of his wife. I mean, just,
Yana.
yeah, over and over again. I'm sort of like, come on. There are times when the relationships work and they survive and go to the end. And that, I think that variation needs to be included.
Yeah. Yeah. To be fair, I don't think it's that the relationships didn't work. It's that usually one of them suffered some calamity.
Right, exactly. But my point is that
Yeah.
they don't always suffer calamity. And so I would love to have seen, like, for example, I would have loved it if Hugo came with Salvor and then they found Gale together. I thought that would have been really cool.
Yeah, I was thinking that too at the end with Hober Mallow. Is that his name? Hober Mallow?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Fit,
Yes.
fit it, like, yeah, there's room in there for two people to fit in
Thank
that
you.
thing.
That was another example. So, there's all these
Yeah.
relationships, and we're invested in them, which is part of the reason it irritates me, because I cared about what happened to Gale and Ray,
Yeah.
and I cared
Right.
about what happened to Salvor and Hugo, and I cared about what happened to Constance and Hober. And thanks for ripping that apart again. That pattern began to be annoying to me. There are cases where relationships do survive the life and death circumstances. Let's just keep one of them together.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Anyway.
I didn't notice that, but now that you mention it, yeah, it makes sense.
So anyway, again, great series. I enjoyed it very much. That would be the one thing that I would like to see happen. Again, just because of the variety of it, because that's what happens in real life. And everything else about this story and about the way the series has progressed feels so real. Even the plot changes that happen on turn of a dime, which are awesome, they feel real. That particular pattern pulled me out of it because it's not real.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So did you see any themes in Foundation?
Yeah, this is a tough one because there's so much going on. I think there's a lot there. I'm not sure if there's one specific theme that is the message of the show in general. And again, I think this probably comes from the source material. It's more about exploring this concept and seeing where it goes. Some things I pulled out, again, trying to make the theme as a sort of statement of universal truth. If I look at the Empire and Empire as a character, maybe hubris always leads to catastrophe, might be one, or another theme we see. I guess it's the beginning, but also maybe more so represented in the second season with Demerzel, which is, I think, it's a theme that has come up before in something that we discussed, which is enslavement always leads to rebellion.
Oh yeah, that's the one we discussed in the island.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a theme, not just with that character, but with the kind of the show as a whole, right? That's everyone's kind of under the yoke of Empire, and eventually that's going to lead to people pushing back against that. And then there's a theme of in the face of catastrophe, giving into despair and cynicism gets you nowhere, right? That's sort of the hope line at the end with Brother Constant. And I think that's sort of the setup that for the whole Foundation, right? That's Harry could have just said, "Oh, we're doomed. Let's let it be." And he said, "No, we're not going to give into that. We're going to create this thing that's going to try to bring humanity back from the ashes and let us have another chance at civilization again." So those are some of the themes that I picked out. What do you think about those? And did you come up with one or more other ones?
I think those are good themes. And the theme that I came up with was the last one that you mentioned, which was the hope theme. And I sort of just framed it as hope and determination in the face of hopelessness, because I agree. I think that, from the very beginning, we get the theme of through Harry Seldon's wanting to pull hope out of the inevitable failure of the Empire. And so this is our hope, to shorten the Dark Ages through this proposal. And you even see hope in Empire himself, his hope to prove Harry Seldon wrong. And, every single character has to draw on hope to some degree or another. And then hope's, partner, if you will, hand in hand, hope goes hand in hand with faith. And I think there's a lot of that too. This, that determination and faith, even when it seems hopeless, to keep going on the road that you think is the most hopeful. That's what I pulled from it. And again, I think every single one of the characters exhibit that hope and that faith throughout, even the ones who are ostensibly the villains, Empire, who I'm not sure is always the villain in the story. They have hope that they can prove Harry Seldon wrong, and they have faith in the process that they set up. So it's just, I think that would be the main theme for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think there's also, if you think about yourself living in the world, like say you're living on Terminus and Harry Seldon set up this foundation, and there's like these crises that happen, and it's been 100 years or more since anything's happened with the Vault. It would be kind of terrifying to live in that world when a crisis comes upon you. Like everything like slightly scary that happens, you'd be like, oh, is this the crisis? Is this the crisis? Are we going to survive this? Like, it would be so scary knowing like this potential doom is coming around the corner at any moment. I mean, I guess we all live in that state, but we're just kind of oblivious to it. It's different when it's coming.
That's a good point. So that makes their hope and faith even stronger, living in that kind of environment.
Right, yeah, it would inevitably lead to that, right? That makes sense.
So as a writer, what do you take away from Foundation?
Oh my gosh. I think it's what we talked about before. Become a better writer. Don't be afraid to go big. I think I mentioned this on another episode as well. It's like, don't be afraid to go big and to have multiple storylines going and multiple characters and developing those and having interlocking and interwoven storylines. More so for outside my YA series. For the YA stories, they're fairly straightforward, fairly linear plot lines. But certainly for adult books, yeah, strive for more complex plots. I like that.
Yeah.
What is your writing takeaway?
Well, as we've also talked about previously, this is another reminder for world building and to go ahead and not an info dump, not spending paragraphs and paragraphs on crafting the world, but in an organic and natural way, really bring the world to life. The other thing that I really appreciated this is that these characters followed rules, for lack of a better way of explaining it. The character was a particular way, and then they stayed within character and problem solved within their character framework and reacted within their character framework. And it was really, it's almost like, for example, let's take Demerzel, who is the robot, right? She has her programming rules, which she has to function within. But all the characters do, because that's who they are. It's part of their personalities and what makes them who they are. And these characters really are terrific at following their character rules. So I really like that too. That's what I take away as a writer.
Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah, and you're right. They consistently operate within their worldview. Yeah. And if they don't, there's a reason for that change. Like Hober Mallow. Hober Mallow changes because of his interaction with other people. Otherwise, he kind of was on the path.
And it's clear you can see it happen, and it makes sense.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the Foundation television series seasons 1 and 2. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the movie E.T. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.